Hi there, lovelies. It's me, Bitter Corella. I'm not filming in the video crypt today. In fact, I'm filming at home, here in my personal library. So, a couple things that have been happening here. First of all, our book, submitted for the approval of the Midnight Pals, is out. In fact, it sold out of the first print run, and we ordered a second print run. So we're very excited that we should be receiving those shortly. If you're interested in getting a copy, I've got one right here so you can actually see what it looks like. Just DM me on Twitter at midnight_pals. Or if you're interested in just getting one right now, you can also get the downloadable PDF digital version. Now that usually retails for $20, which is a weird thing to say because I set that price. So saying it retails sounds kind of weird, but for a limited time, you can get it half off for $10 using the code Minnesota at my Gumroad store. I'll put a link in the description. Now, even better, those $10, in fact, all the proceeds for you using that code go to help the Black Visions Collective in Minnesota. That's an organization that works for Black liberation and radical transformative justice in the Twin Cities. And I think in these times it's a very good cause to support. So very happy to be able to help out a little there. So that's a good thing to check out. Unrelated, I've also finished a nice little horror-themed RPG Maker game. It's called Satanic Panic, and it's all about the 90s Satanic Panic. You get to play as a punk rock fan who has to stop the town Blue Noses from burning all their punk and heavy metal albums when Satanic Panic, or self-described Satanic Panic expert Mike Warnicki, comes to your town. So that's something you can get on my Itch.io store for free. If you like video games and you like kind of comedy horror, that's something you might want to check out. Otherwise, things of course have been very up in the air lately, so I thought maybe to clear my head a little bit, I would do some reading. You know, pick one of the books off these shelves here and just have a little bit of a distraction, just to clear my head, just to do a little bit of reading. And the book I picked was Stephen King's Eyes of the Dragon. Now, Eyes of the Dragon is, as far as I know, Stephen King's only foray into the high fantasy genre. And it's a little disappointing. It's an odd book because Stephen King, for whatever his flaws, he is usually compulsively readable. He's a natural storyteller, and his words just have a flow to them. This one, though, Stephen King is really trying hard to very self-consciously be a storyteller. The technique that he uses is very similar to ones you'll see in don't know, Michael Ende's Never-Ending Story, for example, where the storyteller, despite being the omniscient third-person narrator, is still a character that inserts himself into the narrative. So there are a lot of asides to the reader where our narrator says stuff like, oh, this storyteller remembers this thing, and remind me to tell you about it later. Stuff like that, where it's very obviously intended to evoke the feel of an oral story, possibly a bedtime story that a parent would tell to a child. And from what I understand, this book was originally written for King's daughter Naomi. She wasn't very interested in his usual horror output, so he decided to do something a little different that she might be able to appreciate. And maybe King actually anticipated reading it to her as a bedtime story, or that other parents might do that for their kids. Unfortunately, it doesn't really translate over very well. It starts out kind of interesting, especially because, well, it doesn't translate very well. The big issue is that if you've read, well, he does that thing where the storyteller constantly says, oh, this thing that happened, I'll tell you about it some other time. But he's always threatening to tell us out stories that are extremely not interesting. For example, if the main character, Peter, eats a potato dinner, oh, they're the finest potatoes. They tasted so good. These potatoes were just the best. Remind me to tell you about these potatoes that were so good sometime. And it's like, I don't really want to know about the potatoes. That's not interesting at all. Stop threatening me with a bad time. So, Eyes of the Dragon. It's basically a fantasy story, although not many fantastic elements in it. In fact, there's really only there's only two standard fantasy things that happen in the book. One, there is a dragon that appears very briefly before it is killed, takes about a paragraph to kill it, and its head is mounted on the wall, so that's kind of a plot point later on. And the second thing is, there is a wizard who ostensibly can do magic, though he doesn't really do any of it over the course of this book. But it's fantasy in the sense that it takes place in a quasi-medieval world that is not our world. So I guess that counts. It's more of a political intrigue in historical fiction, I guess. No, there is a kingdom. Delane, the old king, Roland, has two sons. Peter, who is awesome and perfect in every possible way, and Thomas, who kind of sucks. Now, there's also an evil wizard in this kingdom. His name is Flag. Flag hates goodness. He wants things to be bad. That is his sole motivation and defining characteristic. Flag decides that Peter is too good, so he's got to get rid of Peter. Thomas, however, can be manipulated and uses a puppet ruler to make things bad, which is what Flag really wants. So, he kills the old king, frames Peter, Peter goes to jail, and Thomas becomes a puppet ruler. And then, well, how's Peter going to get out of this mess? Well, it turns out, in the most boring way possible. This book is extremely boring. Literally nothing happens for most of this book, and it's disappointing because it does start out kind of promising. One of the earliest passages is pretty interesting. It mentions how the old queen died in an incident where she was watching a juggler perform while sucking on a slice of lemon. And the juggler accidentally dropped the ball, which shattered on the ground. It was made of glass, by the way. And the queen was so surprised that she gasped, sucked the lemon into her throat, and choked to death. Mentions that the funeral happened the next day while a juggler was being executed in the backyard. Now, that's kind of an interesting detail because it's not the sort of thing you'd get in a standard children's or young adult fairy tale story, which this kind of feels like it was intended to be. So from that detail, I thought, oh, this is going to be a little darker, a little grimmer, maybe something along the lines of a Richard Roberts book or Angela Carter fairy tale reimagining. And I was kind of on board for that. Unfortunately, later chapters don't bear that out, and it becomes a very standard young adult geared fairy tale where everything is basically in black and white, very little character development. Everyone's just kind of an archetype, which gets really dull. Peter, for example, is just described as being very handsome, strong, kind, intelligent, great, just all around. Everybody loves him. Everything is perfect for Peter. He is incredibly dull. Thomas is a slightly more interesting character because he's sympathetic. He's the less favored second son of the king who's always in his brother's shadow. There's there's a very heartbreaking scene in this book where Thomas, remembering a pleasant memory of an afternoon he spent with his father on the lake, decides to carve a wooden sailboat as a gift for his dad to show his love. He spends all day carving this thing. Doesn't turn out very good, but he still brings it to the king to show it to him. But the king is so distracted talking about how great Peter did in some archery contest that he kind of ignores Thomas. It's a very real scene. You can really feel for Thomas, and it's the closest we get to any character development at all in this book. Now, Thomas, since he is a sympathetic character with actual motivations and thoughts beyond just being perfect like Peter, you would hope he'd be the viewpoint character, but in fact, once he is seduced by the evil magician into basically being that evil puppet, he disappears from the book for about 2/3. In fact, that evil magician also disappears completely from the book because, I mean, he's not like a deep character or anything, but at least an evil magician would be kind of interesting. But I guess King didn't want to talk about that. He didn't think that was interesting at all. He was much more interested in the story of what Peter does when he's in prison at the top of a very, very, very tall tower. And what does he do for 5 years when he's in prison? Well, he's got a cunning plan. And this cunning plan is so incredibly stupid that it's a wonder that King devoted approximately 1,000,000 pages to it. Because this plan is that Peter demands that he receive a cloth napkin with his meals in prison, and he removes a single thread from the cloth napkin every day, which he then uses to weave a rope so that he can make a daring escape. This is the bulk of his story. This is an entire story, in fact, in this book. And it's very odd because King, he does this thing in this book where he writes things that are easy for him to write, but disappointing to read, because he seems to be reluctant to put any problems in the path of his characters, because that would require a lot of effort to write solutions for. So you would think that, well, I'll just do one example of this, is the fact that the head judge of the kingdom in this, before the evil magician takes over, Anders Pena, very noble guy, honest, honorable, good man. So you would think that once the magician takes over, he would get rid of Anders Pena and maybe kill him. Seems like a good idea. Well, he doesn't. He doesn't take any move against Anders Pena. Waits for him to get so disgusted with the evil magician's rule that Anders Pena just retires to the country. And then the magician just thinks, yeah, that's fine. I'll let him retire. I'm not going to do anything. Not going to try and stop him. Well, and obviously King wrote this because Peter needs a friend on the outside to help him get out, help him get things done. And if Anders Pena was dead, it would require King to think of some other solution to write in there. But I guess he didn't want to do that. So that's a recurring theme in this, that in order for things to actually work out, our evil magician has to be incredibly stupid. Now, Flag, that's the thing, is since King's not really familiar with writing in fantasy, I think he just thought that an evil wizard should basically be able to do anything and not have any rules. But that means that for him not to instantly win in the beginning of the book, he has to be really dumb and not do anything that makes any sense. Flag has the ability to spy on our heroes at any moment, anytime, see what they're doing, but he just doesn't do it because he doesn't feel like it. Likewise, he has constant constant dreams that foretell the future, but when he wakes up, Flag always thinks, that was just a dream, probably didn't mean anything. So, because of that, he does nothing for the 5 years that he has Thomas as his puppet and Peter up in that prison tower, the worst thing he does is encourage Thomas to levy very high taxes, which I guess makes Thomas kind of a jerk, but hardly... I mean, if your goal is to be... If you're the most evil wizard in the world and your goal is the complete destruction of order, I would think you'd probably aim a little higher than just, you know, high taxes. Not really setting your sights very high. Anyway, so this plan that Peter has is to weave a rope from threads from cloth napkins. And immediately, when I read that, I thought, it's interesting that a medieval style kingdom would have an infinite supply of cloth napkins. But they do. And in fact, not only do they have an infinite supply of cloth napkins, in this book it's stated specifically that each cloth napkin is used once and then thrown away, which is incredibly wasteful. Even in our society, which is probably the most wasteful society you could conceive of, we don't just use cloth napkins one time. I believe a cloth napkin is good for multiple uses, but in this one they just throw away. How do they have all these cloth napkins? Well, luckily, King decides this is something worth explaining. So it turns out that a previous king had some public works program where he paid old ladies to make cloth napkins. It's like they had the New Deal in this medieval kingdom, I guess. Also, King is very adamant that each cloth napkin has the royal seal on it, and they have to pay a woman to take off each royal seal before the cloth napkin is given to Peter so that he can make his rope out of it. This book goes on and on. It is extremely long. It is extremely dull. Another weird aspect is, yeah, Peter's up in that tower and he's constantly sending notes to people on the outside so that they can help him. And each note is about a Bible's length. I mean, he's writing notes in his own blood on a tiny little scrap of paper, and yet each note goes, "Hi there, it is I, Peter, the rightful king of the kingdom, who is currently in jail up at the top of this extremely tall tower. I am currently in the process of making a rope out of threads of napkin. I sure hope that this note does not get intercepted by the evil wizard, who apparently is hugely smart and scheming and trying to kill me. But it's okay, I'll just lay out my entire plan right here in this note that I'm going to throw out the window and hope that my buddy out there picks it up." So I think King, again, was writing for a younger audience and just assumed, well, since they're younger, yeah, whatever, you got to explain things to them. But it ends up being that just Peter's plan and the evil wizard's plan are pretty dumb. I guess that's probably why it's put in a fantasy world, because for some reason when these same things happen in a period history piece that's in our world, we kind of demand they make a little bit of sense, but I think people have a little bit of lower expectations for that sort of thing if it's set in a fantasy world. But God, it's awful. By the way, at the very end, once after ignoring Peter up in that tower for 5 years and never bothering to use any of his magic to spy on Peter, see what he might be doing up there, up at the top of the tower. That one guy, that guy he framed for murder and got locked up there, the one guy that could conceivably, if he ever got out, ruin his plans to completely destroy the kingdom. No, he doesn't feel like checking up on him. But he finally does, and when he realizes that Peter is making a rope, what does the master schemer Flag the magician decide to do? Does he use his magic to stop Peter? No, he picks up a giant axe and goes on a rampage, running across the kingdom, killing every guard he runs into. And then apparently that's his big thing. He's just gonna hit Peter with an axe. But then it turns out the rope that Peter was dangling from over the ground breaks anyway. But luckily, the good guys put a giant pile of napkins for him to fall into, like this is Looney Tunes or something. Anyway, so all in all, this is I have read lots of Stephen King, and he is generally a fun writer. I think one of his biggest strengths is that he has a good voice for character, and he has a lot of sympathy for flawed characters. None of those things are on display in this book. He was very obviously trying to go for a much simpler tone, kind of a black and white morality thing here. Ends up just making the book kind of a slog. So this is one King book that I cannot recommend. Now, it's covered in accolades, and I suspect that a lot of people were just snowed by the name Stephen King. They saw that on the book and were like, well, of course it's got to be good. It's Stephen King. I give it no stars or whatever. Just skip this one. Skip it. Anyway, oh wait, I probably should have said that they were spoilers in this. Then again, this book came out in 1987, so if you haven't read it yet, that's on you.